would like to introduce panel number one. It's called The State of CREtech, the Executive's POV. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to please give a short introduction of themselves, who you are and what you do, and we can get started with the panel.
My name is John Gilbert, Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President for the Rudin family. We own and operate roughly 15 million square feet here in the city of New York, 10 million of it commercial, 5 million of it residential. Latest projects just broke ground in the Brooklyn Navy Yard on Dock 72, working with Suki, and we are just finishing up the Greenwich Lane, which is the old St. Vincent's Hospital down in the West Village.
My name is Robert Entin. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Vornado Realty Trust. Vornado owns and operates almost all commercial buildings, about 25 to 30 million square feet in New York City, and about the same amount in Washington, D.C. My job as the CIO is to kind of manage all things technology. That would be technology in the buildings as well as all the software applications that run the enterprise.
Hi, I'm Sukanya Paciorek. I'm the Executive Vice President and Head of Asset Management at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The Navy Yard, for those of you that have not been there, is a 300-acre complex in the Brooklyn waterfront that spans between Williamsburg and Dumbo. We have about 6 million square feet of real estate, 50 buildings. Currently, we have 4 active development sites, including the one with Rudin and Boston Properties. The other of the 4 development sites, we have one that comes online this summer, which we are actively out in the market leasing, and then we've got 3 more coming down the line. Right after ours is Dock 72, which is the Rudin project. And as the head of asset management, I oversee operations, leasing, and the infrastructure team.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Fishman. I'm CEO and founder of GAIA Real Estate. We have around 18,000 units in Manhattan, Connecticut, all over, a lot also in Texas. We separately have a few condo buildings in the city and the office buildings. And with our background and everything, we're also in the technology real estate, and we have like a startup called Finch Living that is now already in a few thousands of units, which we're making the apartment complexes and the building like one community that people work together, live together, and so forth.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to start by asking what technologies or services are you implementing within your buildings, and importantly, what is showing you the biggest ROI?
Should I start?
Please.
So we love technology. We started this back in 1995. Al Gore was kind enough to create the internet for us all, and our job was to figure out how our real estate actually could connect to that. And 55 Broad Street, which is just down the street here, is known by many as the grandfather of all smart buildings. Fast forward to today, what we saw in 2009 was the need for an operating system to really understand and allow other products, other applications to plug into. And so this OS does multiple things. It's called Entin, which is derived from an ancient Algonquin word that means prayer or blessing. And we like to say that Entin is actually a blessing to property owners because it answers their prayers. And what I mean by that, it's an integrated platform. All subsystems plug into it. It uses machine learning and analytics to prescript and prescribe actions that will take place or should take place. And the third thing it does is it allows us to enter into a new conversation with our customers. At the end of the day, if you're looking at technology for your buildings, if you're in the real estate business, and I would also say if you think you're in the real estate business, think again, because you're really in the technology, data collection, expression business. That's what we are, whether it's a rent bill or a default notice, that's all data. But it ultimately allows us to retain our tenants, to retain our customers. We've cut our hot and cold calls by 80%. We've saved over $5 million this year, simply correlating data sets that never talk to each other. For example, occupancy. The volume of air that we push to our buildings should be directly related to where those people are in the building. And what we do in the middle of the day is we actually do a little mini ramp down. So if you look at our energy curve, it's like a double humped camel. and that divot in the middle of the day, as people go to lunch, we modulate fan speed down, and we save on average in a single building over 1 megawatt of power a day. Across our portfolio, again, $5 million, we save 50 cents a foot, and constantly learning, constantly remembering, rather than dumping the data every day, we use the data we collect today to do our job tomorrow better.
Great, and we'll certainly talk about data a lot in this panel. Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about technology?
Similar to John, we have a lot of buildings that gather a lot of data by a lot of the BMS systems, and so we have the two, as I said, two portfolios, one in New York and one in Washington. They both have slightly different needs and different views of how to collect the data and what to do with it, but in Washington, as an example, we have an operations center where every single building is online in the operations center. In New York, we don't. But in New York, probably much like your portfolio, we have engineers in every building at all times because of the size of the buildings. But generally speaking, we're doing a lot of data collection and have been for an awfully long time. It's mostly energy related, because really where a lot of the savings comes is from energy management. But the other area that we're doing more and playing with other machine learning is the next frontier for ingesting all the big data that comes out of these buildings. And so we're playing with a few models in different buildings, but it's both energy. The other thing is early warning on preventive maintenance. When these systems now see abnormalities in fan speeds or VAV openings, devices that don't operate as they normally do, you get an early warning to send an engineer to take a look at it. And that too, and I'm sure for you guys as well, generates a lot of savings. So we spend a lot of time on building management, building energy systems, but for us the other thing is that we're now finally seeing the convergence of all of the network devices in the building. We've always had we have two wide area networks, our corporate network where all the applications live, and we've always had a separate wide area network where all the buildings are connected and they live. Years ago, we said we should really converge those two and they should all be on the same network. And we were well on our way there until this little need of cybersecurity concerns came along, and we said, you know what, bandwidth isn't so much money that we shouldn't keep these two networks separate forever. So we continue to spend a lot of time on building out the building WAN. And one of the surprising facts was, I think when we're done, our building wide area network will be stronger, believe it or not, than our corporate network, and mostly driven by video. We have 3,000, 4,000 cameras throughout the portfolio. They're all, of course, visible inside every building, but we want all of them to be visible at a command center from anywhere, which has enormous bandwidth requirements from the building. So, we're kind of sweeping together video, the building management systems, turnstile management, and security systems, all really on one large managed network, which is we're spending a lot of time on that.
So the Navy Yard is actually a mission-driven nonprofit. We focus on industrial and manufacturing jobs and keeping them in New York. And so our business model is relatively different from the other panelists, and our kind of commercial model is a lot different because we're subsidizing rent so that manufacturers, industrial companies can stay in New York and keep middle-class jobs in New York. We have about 400 tenants, all of which kind of are in the industrial space, so people that actually make a product, a thing, whether it's woodworkers or metal fabricators, robotics companies, whatever it might be. And so we're at the very early stages of doing what our other panelists are doing, which is taking very old buildings and upgrading them to operational efficiency standards that's pretty common in the market today. And part of that is figuring out kind of the HVAC upgrades and the new kind of technologies and the data pieces that we need to put together to make that happen. The kind of unusual things that we have in our portfolio that we've been trying to solve for. One is a transportation plan. So because we're a 300-acre complex and we're not particularly close to any subway lines, part of making our growth really valuable and meaningful to those people that want to come to us and want to work at the Navy Yard is making sure that people can actually get there every day. And so we've been, over the last year, putting together a transportation plan that includes an app. We have correctly chosen not to build things on our own. We go out and find partners who actually have things that will work for us automatically. And so we have an app-enabled transportation plan. We have a shuttle service that now runs on a routine schedule to the AC in Dumbo, and that gets augmented this summer to run to the Barclay Center so that there's, we're now connected to 12 subway lines on an automated fashion that anyone that's coming to the yard We have 7,000 people that work there today. We're going to have 20,000 people that work there 2 years from now, and make sure that those 20,000 people, when they get off the subway, can look at their app, figure out how far the shuttle is, and if they have 5 minutes, they can go get a coffee. If it's 1 minute, they'd wait. So that's a big piece of what we're trying to do, is piece together the large kind of community-based things that we need to do. The next phase that we're working on right now, the 400 tenants, part of the reason that people come to the Navy Yard is because they come for each other. We have people that have CNC routers, we have people that have lathes, all sorts of weird machinery all over the place, and they want to know each other. They came because there are artists in the community, there's a robotic company, whatever. And they want to know who else is in the yard and how to connect with those people. And so we're in the process of building an app, a community-based app, so that tenants can not only find each other, but also find pieces of equipment, find ways to collaborate, share employees if they need to. And so that's a pretty unusual kind of use of technology, but one that I think is really important for us as we grow.
So our background was investing in technology and startups for many, many years with the real estate. So we are always open for new technologies and implementing new technologies. So we're checking on constant basis what's going on in the market. We have also a few beta sites that the startups are doing in our properties, and we have like big systems like the Yardi. So we're checking all the time things. So besides the obvious, which we checked all the time, which is like how you save on utilities, on energy and water, which is pretty much obvious, and all the green technologies, we thought that there is a big opportunity in the rental business, because everything today in the green, you still have to do like calculation, what's exactly the ROI, because it's like you're putting a lot of capital, sometimes it's subsidized, but then you have to see how much it will last and how much it will save. And it's let's say, many of the new technologies still without subsidy and without some grants, it's not really economic because of other alternatives. So we're still doing it. But what we came is that in the rental apartment, which I don't think anyone is really talking about it, is the biggest problem and the biggest loss of money is the turnover. So if you take the typical US complex, it turns like 50% per annum, which if you take about a 300 unit complex, it's crazy. You're talking about 150 people, tenants that are moving out. Now, moving out means 1 month empty apartment, no rent, turning the units, making it ready, painting it, changing the carpet, whatever, paying a commission, showing it. And that's the big loss of money for an owner. And we're struggling with this like everyone in the industry. And then we started with our own property, then we came with this, like you said, that like the community effect, that if we can do, because the problem is that basically there is no brand in this industry. So if you take the US business, there's no one knows who is the owner of the properties. No one cares who is the owner. No one cares who is the management. They're all commodity. Everyone sees them the same thing, that they are the guys that clean the garbage and paint the apartment. And no one is willing to pay a premium, or no one really cares where they live. The rent is done, and now they're looking across the street, and if it's like a few bucks less, they will move. They don't really care. And it's true also when they search for apartments. So like if you go for a new place or a new city to visit, you know a few brands that you'll always look for a hotel, like a W, a Ritz, a Hilton. In the rental apartment, it doesn't exist. There's nothing to search. So our idea was to come with an app, with a digital app that connects the digital and the physical and makes it like one ecosystem. So connects between the tenants themselves, between the management and the owner and the tenants and the businesses around it. And it works very well. It creates a community. People make friends, so they are not so fast, moving out, or people make some money by offering services to each other and so forth. Now, if you think about this industry, if you can only save 10% of the turnover, like in a typical property, you're talking about 30 apartments a year. You're talking of real money, not like saving a peanut here, peanut there. You're talking about tens and tens of thousands of real dollars that goes to your bottom line every year. And of course, on the apartment business, on everything, on cap rate, you're talking about millions of dollars. So on ROI, and this is like the big money that we saw in technology saving.
Thank you. And it's so interesting to hear the variety of perspectives on the very same question and what each one is really seeing the biggest ROI from. So thank you for sharing. My next question is a little bit more about data. And we've identified the just vast amounts of data that each of our systems within our buildings can produce. How is technology being leveraged to identify opportunities in a building's data to drive increased sustainability, energy efficiency, or simply enhance just the overall bottom line?
Yeah, we saw the key in that being that you needed to have a system, if you were going to future-proof your building, you needed to have a system that could collect external data, internal data, BMS data, non-BMS data. If you couldn't do all of those things, then you were missing out. And let me give you an example. It's that as we measure occupancy, we're ultimately able to correlate that occupancy, and this is all automated. It's not somebody standing in the engine room doing this. This is all automated. As people leave the building, and our buildings actually sense a decrease in population, fan speed modulates. Two data sets that never, ever, ever talked to each other before. One is a BMS, fan speed, the other is non-BMS, occupancy. Weather, another hugely important aspect in terms of startup time. How do we determine when is the most efficient time to start a building or to ramp down a building? How do we shrink our operational day? All of those are different data sets that need to ultimately talk to each other. And the key thing about Entin, for us, we went around the world and we looked for a system. We knew what we wanted. And it's such a basic idea. My iPhone, your iPad, your Mac has an operating system. Why doesn't this building have an OS? Basic, simple question. And the answer is because nobody had actually taken the time to build it. And that's why we did. And what it does is it allows ultimately new applications to plug into Entin, which then you can immediately test the ROI. You can immediately understand what the value of that is and how it relates to all the other subsystems that currently operate in the building. The most important thing about data, if you remember nothing else other than one thing from this at least from what I say, I'm sure other people will say smart things, is that data needs to be remembered. We need to remember our data and we need to learn from that data and to use it tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that to do our job better. Now, how do you do that? You ultimately do that by not flushing your data every day and putting it into the cloud in an organized fashion so that ultimately those new data sets, those new correlations, those new relationships can be expressed and shared with your customer. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the data is the key to this business. And yeah, there's a massive amount of data that's spit out by all the BMS systems and non-BMS systems. And an organized industry standard for storing that data has been slow in coming. Haystack, I don't know if you guys are invested in Haystack yet, but Tritium and Niagara has been collecting data for years, but it's not been normalized. There's a couple of standards out there they're playing with for normalizing the data. I think, and Entin is one of, there's a lot of, this is a great space to be in because there's a lot of technology and investment in that part of the space, and machine learning is going to change the way these buildings operate over time. So I think in addition to what John's saying, I think openness to the data. I think the key is, and I think in a lot of the, throughout the enterprise, one of the things that we push for with all of our vendors and platforms is if they're not open APIs to all of the applications and to the data, then the ability to get synergies from that data decrease. And so I think openness and standardization of that data becomes very important. And I was, as you were talking, I was saying to myself, because it's an enormous opportunity. The amount of data that these buildings spit out, that's the one place in real estate where you actually have big data. We really don't have big data almost anywhere else. On networks, routers, switches, logs, but that's IT stuff in terms of operating. And I was thinking, when you were saying that, all I'm thinking about is one word, I'm thinking Watson, right? When is IBM going to turn Watson loose on this data? Because it's funny that while IBM has invested and so much else. I don't think this, I'm not if it's on the radar yet or not, but, and that brought me to if this stuff's not open, it's, then it's closed to one or two sources. So for me, I think I agree. It's all about data, and it's about storing that data. It's about normalizing it and making sure that it's understandable by lots of different platforms, and that it's open to any of the tools that you want to apply to it to analyze.
I'll keep my comments brief. There's no one in this industry that's doing more on this topic than John and Entin. I mean, not just in this industry, but worldwide. They're really at the forefront of figuring out how to integrate all of the right pieces of data together and use it in a way that is meaningful and thoughtful. I think part of what the success of Entin and kind of their process over the last 10 to 15 years has been to figure out what data sets are actually useful to make automated, right? So like give it intelligence and let it do what it needs to do every day going forward. And what pieces of that data should go back to a human who can do something about it? Because the thing about real estate is that it's still a human-centric enterprise. There's still people coming to work every day. There's still people running buildings every day. We're not going to get rid of the infrastructure that we've built in terms of humans. But figuring out where decision-making should lie between kind of artificial intelligence and human intelligence, I think, is the key to making this work over time and really thinking through sustainability and efficiency issues.
So there's a lot of data in this business that captured from many, many sources. But I think at the end of the day, data is the raw material. The question is how you analyze and what we're getting out of the data. Now, when you start to analyze the data and start to see what you can learn from this, how you can make your business more efficient, you also understand that there is a big issue in the collecting of data and what exactly is the data now. Because from our experience, for instance, in the apartment business, a lot of the data that is in the system is garbage, because it's a listing agent. She sits on site on some remote place. You would put something just the minimum that she needs in order to get the listing or whatever. And you sit after that in a tower in Manhattan and you're analyzing this, and it's basically you're analyzing data that is not relevant because it's like, she didn't put right things, or you don't really know who is living in your properties or generally and so forth. So I think that we are trying to do it backwards, basically to say first, let's see that they're putting the accurate data and the data that we need in order to get out of it something at the end, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And I think we learned a lot on those. It's basically what people are using and not using, for instance, in the building. So, you see developers are building brand new buildings with amenities that, yes, if you're in a condo in Manhattan, everyone wants to say that they have X, Y, Z, but in reality, no one really uses it. But in apartments, when you don't buy it, and you see that, all the data shows that no one is using it. So it's like a waste of time. We are buying a new property and changing the amenities after a day, that after all the money is spent. So just for one example of things that you can learn from the data. And I agree with you 100% on the automation versus, so in the apartment industry, there are a lot of rent optimization softwares, lots of them. And when you're not manually also checking and also putting some human sense to it, you're getting to sometimes to ridiculous results. So, for instance, the on-site team will get up in the morning and they will get the guidance how much they should rent each unit, a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and so forth. And you see that the rent optimization, because of different things that are going on around it, takes it to a place that doesn't make any sense. But if you monitor it and you say, okay, so why this sitting vacant 3 months? And you ask the listing, and they say, you know what? For this price that the software tells me to, no one will rent it. So you have to, and it happens all the time. So you still need to be very careful with all the technology and software, and still to put some human and some thought into it, and not just use it automatically.
And traditionally, as owners of real estate and asset managers, we've had systems in place like HVAC and water that have been around that you can collect data from right now. But we also have a lot of new technologies that are feeding us new informations about how people are interacting with spaces. So how are we leveraging technology to understand how people are using your buildings? How are you quantifying that interaction by using technology?
It's a great question. In the residential model, what we look at, we think water is the most important piece in residential from an operational data standpoint. Why? Because it tells you exactly what's going on in the building. Water consumption in a residential building is very jagged, but it's almost clockwork. 7 a.m., peak, breaks off, and then 8:30, peak. So you understand, people wake up, they jump in the shower, they start cooking, make some coffee, make some tea. You can follow that rhythm. And what's fascinating for us is that, chemistry and physics have always been the hard sciences that we look to run our buildings. Thermodynamics. First law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transformed. We're off the hook, right? We don't have to create anything, we just have to transform what we already have. Well, as we look at the data today, yes, chemistry, yes, physics, but now suddenly biology and sociology. Now suddenly we're taking the hard sciences and correlating them with humanistic behavioral patterns so that we can truly understand when people need stuff and why. Very fascinating. Our data scientists are just getting into the residential side and that water piece, because from our standpoint, leaks are terrible. Leaks result in mold, result in relocation, result in only bad things. So we're doing a lot of research into flow meters. And understanding the flow, the water flow of that building. So now suddenly if there's an aberration, I know there's a leak somewhere. And I can go find that leak and fix it before it becomes a bigger problem. So again, it's all about these silos that we all have, and how do we blow those silos up and create new relationships and new correlations so that we can really understand that we do live, and I hate the word, but we do live in a holistic society. Things cause other things to have an effect. And if we can understand the cause and effect, if we can understand that relationship, we can fix it and we can solve it.
We are mostly commercial, of course, and so one of the things that a lot of people are playing with in this space is sensor technology in the buildings to know where people are and such. We've been a little skittish as landlords. We see it for corporate and facility managers as a really great boon, because then there's no privacy violations. But we think our tenants are not thrilled about that in their spaces, so common space is the only place that we may play in that area. So we really aren't doing a lot there. It's and more what we're trying to look for in the buildings are ways to make living in them, not living in them from an office point of view, more suitable for the tenant, which deal with making sure they have the right carriers in the building and actually in-building wireless. So I'm looking here and I don't see any antennas. Now maybe it's because they haven't built out the floor yet, but how many buildings today in New York, 10 years ago you'd walk into a building and you kind of expected, you hoped your cell phone worked, but it kind of didn't work and you're okay with it. But today you can't walk into almost any building and not expect your cell phone to work everywhere in the building. So I think from our point of view, it's about facilitating for the tenants, the best possible environment to communicate and work in.
For us, I think the key focus in terms of kind of the future of data and the future of kind of how all this plays out is to make sure that we're a good place to pilot new technologies. We have a massive complex, and we have worked with both tenants and non-tenants over the last decade to implement sustainable new technologies around the yard. But that goes to kind of what's happening next, right? So kind of easy LED-based lighting that also has sensors on it that can track traffic, can track trash around the yard, whatever it might be, figuring out what it is that our sensors around the yard can do to make our lives easier, better, more efficient. So that's been a big focus. And as we get more tenants and we meet more tenants that are in kind of app development software, who are thinking through next stage problems, we think that that's really important. And to me personally, the biggest challenge and maybe opportunity we have in the next few years is figuring out how to tie wellness and occupancy issues back to efficiency as well. We have more and more data today that indoor air quality is directly related to how productive all of us are every single day inside buildings and our overall health. And really figuring out what the input data set is to make that work and making sure that we're building out the infrastructure to make that happen on the back end, I think is really key.
So we're using two things that we are now actually putting in. One is the access control that basically gives us two things. One is to understand what's going on in the property on different levels. So it's not just on the front door or the parking, but it will be on every amenity. Also, it enables the tenants to open with their cell phone, so they don't need to carry all the... That's one thing. And the second thing, we're spreading the beacon technology. I don't know if you're familiar of Intel, which is like working with the Bluetooth. Basically, it means that we can track what's going on from traffic and different things. So basically, it gives us the capability to understand what's going on in the property, what's been used, what's not been used. But also the same thing, the tenants can with their phone check into an event, to a party, to the fitness center, and so forth. It works both ways.
I'd like to now talk a little bit about, and John, we've heard from you a little bit about this, but I want to know, are you building your own technologies internally? Are you outsourcing? What are the pros and cons of each? Maybe it's a mixture of the two?
Sure. So we looked for the tool, as I mentioned, couldn't find it, so we built it. It wasn't our first choice. We didn't set out to do this, but we felt that it was so important. And the reason why we did that is we wanted a platform. We wanted to future-proof that building and be ready for any new application that was coming along that could plug into our system. So we could immediately express that data, run an ROI, and see how that data relates to all other data that we're collecting. Again, it's relationships. It's the biology, if you will, of the building that's now so important. So for us, that's the one time we did create, but we're constantly looking outside. We know that there are going to be applications that we're not going to build that are going to be very valuable. We just want the infrastructure already set so those applications can then plug in easily and in a scalable way to our property so that we're ready to hit the ground running and immediately be able to test out.
So my background is computer science engineering, so I'm a programmer by education. Our view is both is the answer. We do a fair amount of development in-house on things, and we, of course, buy lots of off-the-shelf products. More and more today, we're in an app-driven world, really similar to on the building management side you're speaking of. And so our experience is across all the platforms, and we see the ability for an entrepreneur today to go to Amazon and set up, build, and deploy a highly specialized app in a small period of time. It's tremendous. And therefore, the question then becomes, which things do you want to build and which things do you want to buy?
Absolutely.
We tend to focus our building efforts on two things. One is really integration between the point solutions that we think are good, and we tend to build it in such a way that if we need to replace a point solution with somebody else's, we can just kind of snap it off and put somebody else's in, because that gives us more flexibility. The stuff that we build, I guess, that you'd call proprietary, that's ours, would tend to support the analytics to run the business, and that's usually financial driven, leasing transactions, mark-to-market calculations, the stuff that comes out of our earnings reports and that drives the decision making. That, we do a lot in-house, but otherwise we're mostly looking for the smartest people who are building the most functional apps and figuring out how to fit them into our wheel of applications that run the business.
We're a pretty small, lean and mean team, so we don't have the capacity to build in-house, so we really do rely on outside providers to provide us with the apps and the technology and the software that we need to solve the problems that we have. We're also early stage in terms of, frankly, revamping our finance system, our property management system, our energy system, so what we need is pretty basic in terms of what's out in the market, so we haven't gotten to kind of needing the bespoke thing yet. So hopefully in a few years we'll have more complicated problems that we need to actually think through a little bit more carefully. But for now, the market is ripe with the types of software that we need. Our job is to make sure that we've built a blueprint that frankly solves the problems that we have, and also allows the software solutions that we choose to talk to each other and actually make some sense out of it.
So we do both. So on the community and the app that we talked about, the Finch Living, we couldn't find a solution, so we basically are doing it in-house. We have an R&D center in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And the other things we are just or integrating into it, like Intel technologies or the access control that we are just buying from. There are a few cool and good vendors. And other things we're just implementing and adding to the systems. But I mean, sometimes it's hard, like, the big, heavy machines, like, Yardi, it's very hard to add things into it, and which usually is the case.
And I've certainly heard that a lot. A big challenge with some of the products that are out there today, and certainly some that we've heard from, is that they're sideload solutions, and I think they're getting better and better at connecting and being able to talk to one another.
Well, that's where I spend a lot of time, I guess you could say, preaching openness and open APIs. And yeah, some of the legacy products aren't really as open as they should be.
Sure.
Almost every new app that's built, the typical web model today, they build the actual software using APIs. So it's already ready for outside people to connect. And I think a lot of the legacy apps, which weren't built on their own internal APIs, they're having trouble opening it up. One, because there's technology issues. But the other is, I don't think they've all bought into the need to be open. And I think they captured a certain amount of the market, they're grabbing onto their customers, and I think in the end, if you set them free, you'll retain them, and if you don't set them free, they'll ultimately go somewhere else.
And by the way, I agree with you 100%, but the big players, so some of them, they said that they have APIs and they are like pretend to be, but they think that if they will keep the system closed and they will drive away competition or they'll keep the market share. Right. And of course, it never happened in the history. They always, these dinosaurs will die, but some of them are still doing it. They're like open system, but they really don't let any startup or any new technology come near them or connect to them.
We see that with a lot of the startups that some of the ones who are here and at others, that we dip our toe in the water and use their products, and we hear their war stories about. So we do our own integration. So for us, it's easy. We see their APIs and we work with them. But we hear a lot of the war stories. It's very hard to get data in and out of some of these platforms. But the vendors are coming around. At least they're talking about openness, and a few of them are starting to exhibit
Take action.
Names will stay
sure.
nameless.
I think part of the responsibility for that also is from owners and from people that are actually looking for product, right? When you're looking for new developers, when you're looking for new software, making sure that that's part of the RFP, I think, is critical, right? That's part of your requirement, that it's an open protocol system so that you can figure out how to use them. I think demand drives the market, and so the more people like us tell the market that that's what we want, the more we're going to get it.
Absolutely. And we're still in commercial real estate. We're not a traditionally industry that's been built on the concept of a sharing economy. It's very, individualized and privatized when it comes to our information. So I think when you pair technology, it's something new that, the technology companies are having a little bit of a learning curve also. So that brings me to my last question. We have a few more minutes left. And that is, what CRE industry vertical do you see the greatest opportunity for technology to make an impact? Maybe it's something you've yet to see come to market. Maybe it's something you frankly see a great opportunity for. It could be, a specific part of the industry or more broad part of the industry. I'd love to hear a short answer from each of you.
Short answer for us is you need an operating system. Do not do anything until you have an OS. Second piece is sensors. The sensor technology, they're now the size of my thumbnail, and they cost 50 cents, and they've got a battery life of 12 years. So really investigate the sensor network. The third piece is infrastructure. You as property owners have to have a baseline of infrastructure in order to support these technologies. And you need to understand that, you need to build it, and you need to manage it.
That's a good question. I spend a lot of time wondering, where's the disruption really going to occur in real estate? Biggest opportunity is probably where John's mentioning. in terms of operating buildings. You've got these buildings that have been operating very inefficiently for years, and introducing this technology in buildings will save money and operate better. But to me, that's still incremental. That's saying, okay, we can run these cheaper, and that's good for us. But, I still think we're an industry that's looking for a disruptive event. And, WeWork is a little, but it's not really. It's just using space a little differently. The question, I think, is will there be something that comes along that fundamentally disintermediates the way business is being done? And I've not seen anything there yet.
I think that, whether you're looking at finance or operations or construction, I think all three, the data set that we're trying to build going forward are trying to answer very different questions. It's a question of, one is a question of how, one is a question of why, one is a question of what. And in the construction industry, it's really about trying to figure out what it is, right? The thing you haven't built yet, and try to figure out what it looks like and how to interact with it before it's actually built. And you got, Microsoft has HoloLens now that takes 1D and 2D and makes it into a 3D product. And in operations, you've got people like John out there changing the world and looking at how to integrate pieces to make the world more efficient and tell you about what's happening right now, right? That's the issue, is that construction might be about what isn't built yet, but operations is entirely about what's happening today and how to deal with it tomorrow. And then on the finance side, to me, finance is always the fascinating thing, because it's a retrospective for the most part. I mean, budgets aside, when you're looking at what's happening, people are always looking backwards about what happened. So, that to me is a question about really, I don't know that there's a lot of innovation there, but there's a huge amount of data set kind of analytics that can help companies make better decisions and better choices, figuring out how to take what's already happened and kind of future-proof it.
If you go today to Silicon Valley and you'll talk with the top venture capital funds, they will tell you, not connected to real estate, right? They will tell you that the hottest thing that is gonna come is the IoT, the Internet of Things, and I think it will be the same in the real estate. If you look generally, the way buildings are constructed, built, managed, it's like, more or less, it's like it used to be 100 years ago, and nothing changed. And I think that if we talk on all the problems that we spoke about in this panel, the IoT is like going to change it dramatically. So if, like you spoke about a leak, there's no reason why there will be no message to your phone that says, hey, you have a leak here. There's no way that you should find it after 2 months after the floor is completely ruined and the neighbor on the 3rd floor down complains that there's water in the living room, and so forth and forth. So I think that the IoT is going to change this industry completely in every aspect.
Well, yeah, the IoT is, in fact, what the IoT in real estate is exactly this. It's everything that's going on, partly, but everything that's going on in the buildings. I was at a conference last week where we were talking about cybersecurity and IoT. So now that the IoT is awake, protecting all these devices is very, it's funny, it's not complicated, but it's only made complicated by the fact that the legacy manufacturers who make half of the systems that run these buildings, you talk about old legacy closed architecture, it's really closed. And I think you've accomplished that by putting Entin in front of all of it. On top, and it's all behind it. But at the end of the day, it's still inside of a building network and needs to be protected.
Yeah, we really believe that you can't have smart cities without smart buildings, and you can't have smart buildings without a brain. So look for those brains. Look for those systems that are allowing you to remember what happened, and not only remember, but learn from what you remembered.
And security is something we didn't touch on too much, but it's really a fascinating question. How do we secure buildings when they have a single operating system managing, really the multitude of systems? So I hope these guys will stick around, and if you can find them, maybe it's a question you could ask. That's all the time we have for this panel. Please stick around for the next one. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating.
Thank you.